Enora Online, Book Number 5, Saran's Reach. Written by Arlo Adams. Narrated by Brian Meslar. 1. Giles thumped his boot heels against the horse's flank, then burst through the swirling moats. The horse dematerialized from muzzle to tail as it passed the Foundation's ethereal threshold. I eyed my stamina bar to ensure it was full, and after a count of 5 and a deep breath, sped across the threshold into the blighted land beyond. My imagination moved faster than I did, and I pictured the elf sprawled on the shiny black shards while demons performed unimaginable feats of violent magic on his mount. Once I passed through the gateway, the scene greeting me gave me a small measure of relief. The stallion's muscular haunches flexed as it galloped in long strides, and Giles's hair streamed behind him in white, wavy strands while he hunched over the beast's crest. But the elf and I were far from safe. The fiery demons abandoned their patrol paths, then merged to form 2 ranks in pursuit. The tip of my interface's compass touched N when I faced the green rolling hills in the distance. Giles's scouting had revealed this shortest path to the promised land a week earlier. An anxious grin stretched my features. As my katana clicked from its scabbard and slipped free with a satisfying metallic whisk, a few demons disbanded and turned. Although 2 sped in my direction, I doubted they'd spotted me. The invisibility potion enhancing my natural stealth ability wouldn't have allowed for detection at that distance, so I deduced they were returning to the quadrants they patrolled. But one of the demons hesitated. Then it pivoted and hovered a foot off the ground. Its yellow eyes flashed scarlet. Uh-oh. It sped toward me. "You have been spotted by an enemy. Stealth has broken. Invisibility has ended." The mere memory of resurrection sickness made my temples throb. I darted from my pursuer, my heels kicking up the strange black shards. They rained down behind me in loud, glassy clatters. A glance thrown over one shoulder coupled with a successive blink of my eyes brought up a pain on the closest demon. "Blight Minion, level 22 demon. Formed of the mana siphoned from the souls of conquered magic users, Blight Minions serve demon underlords. Although they can dwell only on blighted lands, they are capable of casting across the blackened threshold and will expand blighted areas in pursuit of beings with magical essences." Although Giles' logical reservations about combat against high-level demons kept him close to the instant's gateway, he'd been able to adequately scout our potential enemies. They constantly crossed each other's paths and disappeared behind rock outcroppings to the northeast and south, so rendering an accurate count required multiple trips outside. But as soon as he counted 40 of the hovering 7-foot-tall minions, they began to vanish into the soil as if sucked down by Hell's Hoover, then reappeared in a different color than when they'd left. It was hard to determine whether he saw new demons when they popped up, or if they recharged somehow and reappeared. Then he analyzed one of the low levels up close, focused his eyes only on it, and waited to see if the same level demon would reappear when his subject vanished. But the demon spotted him. Combat ensued. Giles bested it. Then he made a beeline for the instance. By that point, we decided waiting for the governor to take another shot at our Foundation was imprudent. We had agreed upon objectives that needed sorting. Time was sifting out of a hole in the bottom of our hourglass, and I was still only level 20. The non-elite seemed to revolve around the movements of the level 90s. Although the closest to me was only at 22, and I might handle him in one-on-one combat, a couple weeks training to learn the challenging sword strokes and proper form of my new class lent little confidence about how I'd do against 3 or 4, or 40. So, I ran, and the sandy shards rained. For weeks, I'd jogged every morning with the Cine, resulting in my stamina increasing 22%. Deep breathing exercises eventually formed the lung capacity I needed to recover when my stamina bar blinked red. It was a massive victory when I finally balanced my pace and the bar hovered above center for prolonged periods. A tick up, a tick down. But stamina didn't equate to HP, and none of that work earned me a single health point. I was still what my old guildmates from Light of Babylon called squishy. So, breathing maintenance wasn't the goal today. Instead, I'd break the hell out of the blight even if I thumped onto my back and huffed until it hurt in the hills beyond. Better to pass out in the smooth green grass than find myself with shards stabbing into my hindquarters as a fiery green demon eviscerated me. The stretch of lifeless land seemed to expand before me as the nearest demon closed the distance. If I didn't rally, I'd be toast. I lengthened my strides, clenched my teeth, and willed my quads to work harder. I forced myself to ignore my katana's scabbard slapping my back. Its strap slipped back and forth until I feared it might untie and slide off. Another 100 yards, then my feet would hit solid earth. The demon closed on my left with glowing eyes of flickering fire. Warmth radiated from the flames licking the air around its body. My thighs protested, and the green ground cover was out of reach. The plan had failed. I'd be caught, KO'd, and wake in the cave without the prospect of Giles's aid when the resurrection sickness abated. It was a done deal. We'd agreed that if one of us made it out, he'd keep going. We'd made promises. Allies were needed to bolster our foundation. The clock spun with a relentless determination to pin us in the corner. Dicini's people would soon reach their winter camp. On foot, it was 2 days north of my current position. By the time I reached them, Giles would be on the mount he'd stabled south of the Plague Barrens, entering Warrington. When his business was done, he'd return to the Queen's Forest, a home he'd been forced to abandon long ago, then prepare to receive the Michonne and open a portal to our bind point in the Foundation. If we were lucky, a few elves and some descendants of the humans he'd rescued from the governor's feudal domain 50 years ago would join us, since we wanted to time our rendezvous, and because I didn't want to risk a second horse's life by riding across the blight, I'd go it on foot. If nothing else, I'd boost my stamina attribute even more. A glowing appendage stretched toward me. The radiating air snatched me from the musings I'd used to distract myself from my throbbing legs and heaving lungs. My flesh would soon be demon toast. Turn! My foot couldn't find purchase in the shards, so I face-planted. My katana slid across the shiny chips, then rattled to a halt. When I rolled over, the demon towered above, its heat sucking my eyeballs dry. Instead of burning me alive, it just hovered. The silvery ripple of a wavy line washed the flames away from its head, then slid down to an anterior that reminded me of distant rainfall on the horizon, leaving the demon painted in metallic liquid from top to bottom. It pressed cooler air around me as it bore down. The glowing appendage jutted out, then touched my chest. A frigid wave froze my bones. My arms folded into my lap as my eyelids fluttered, and a weighty exhaustion loosened my aching quads. Its eyes flashed back. In the midst of my discomfort, I realized the thing was analyzing me. Its appendage jerked back, drawn close to its chest in a strangely human gesture of timidity. Then it lowered its head and dove into my chest. The overcast sky dimmed as an unnatural light fell over me. Giant gold lettering materialized, then bloomed against a raven backdrop. Silvery waves shimmered across its textures. The depths of Saran. Beads of sweat popped from my pores. My boots scraped as I was drawn involuntarily forward. Bubbles of magma spat into the air, then plopped into the fiery pools on either side of my path as my focus was drawn to the shadowed area ahead where wide steps led to a granite platform. A deep crackling voice growled in the darkness, echoing in the fiery chamber. "You have yet to arrive, Mythic." Recognition of the speaker's voice was instantaneous. The familiar, low timbre of the smoky visage I'd addressed on my second day in Enora, in the Tomb of the Lost. "Came," I growled. "It is I." Purple light bloomed from an unseen overhead source, cutting a triangular arc in the void of black. His brawny figure perched atop a throne of ebony crystal. New golden letters in a Gothic font appeared above the two twisting horns jutting from either side of his skull. "Underlord came. Level 70, Elite Demon Underlord. Boss." The beads of perspiration rolled rivers down my forehead as a wave of nauseating heat spiraled up my spine. My voice seemed tinny in comparison. "How am I here?" "My minions channel my will." "The depths of Saran, then." "This is my stronghold. where you could someday suffer my wrath, but I offer you a different outcome, Shenhua. I shivered despite the heat. My knees trembled. So real were the sensations, I'd have sworn I was actually there. My voice quaked in my throat. What outcome? He spread his arms to gesture at the black world around him. Bring the mother of your child and serve me in Saran's depths, and you shall enjoy power beyond imagination. A long, crooked finger with an onyx nail unwound. Defy me, and burn in my pools for eternity. A whole handful of the jagged digits swept in an arc to infer his meaning, as if the lava wasn't already soaking me in sweat. I struggled against ripples of electric fear coursing through my nerves. You'll find I'm into daylight. I swallowed a stone, forcing my determination to my lips. Besides, I've been vanquishing foulness like you for as long as I can remember. Just because I haven't come yet doesn't mean I don't remember the promise I made you when I thumped Kroll's ass. Kaim's head lolled back, revealing the underside of his chin, where red skin sunk into a triangle of bone. Laughter echoed across the cavern and slithered into my ears like steely caterpillars. He raised a reflective two-handed sword with two blades of black glass filled by flames and split by a slant of metal embossed with screaming skulls. The sword was pimped. I'm fed by the fear in your trembling legs. Kaim swept the sword, and its orange flames reflected off the onyx armor, covering his body from helm to boots. The motion, combined with the metal spikes curving from the top of the shining black helmet, rang with familiarity. I flashed to the memory of a black portal through which Priya had vanquished a demon at Mora's Warrington University staff dormitory. So, that figure hadn't been Halcram as I'd suspected, but his underlord. He swung the sword in a downward arc, and a river of fire flooded from its tip to cross the gap between us and set me alight. My flesh bubbled and boiled. I screamed in agony. His voice thundered, Come! 2. Cool air graced my body when it doused the flames. Then the sprawling black landscape reappeared. Echoes of burning flesh reverberated through my body as the dark clouds hanging over the blighted land materialized. The silver demon hovered. Another ripple rose across the demon's metallic form, then it was engulfed in flame. At a respectful distance beyond, his companions of varying color and texture hovered like pistons firing at quarter speed. The purveyor of the imagery moved a few feet away, never removing its creepy gaze from me. Static filled my ears, and I gazed skyward, expecting to see the wings of 1,000 ravens fluttering overhead. Then my body began to sink, and the shards surrounding me bounced on the backs of my hands. Kicking furiously, I pedaled backward, flinging slivers into the air. A narrow whirlwind formed. The debris burst upward, twisted, then shot across the blighted land in every direction. A growl emanated beneath me as the spiraling shard storm drilled into the land and cut a wide hole. The whirlpool grew wider by the second, and I sat transfixed by purple light rippling around its edges, like a horizontal portal into hell. Gemini! Run! My daze evaporated. I rolled toward my katana, grasped it, then set my feet beneath me. Like a runner off the blocks, I lowered my head, dug my feet deep into the shards, then launched. The howling hole tattered my back with the glassy stones, cutting into the nape of my neck, but I set my eyes to the path ahead and sprinted. Giles stood next to his horse, daggers in hand, his hair twisting wildly to his shoulders. He bounced, ready to spring on my enemies should they pursue. I dove, rolled, then popped up next to the elf. The whirlpool widened. The shard cloud rose into a tornado nightmare for the second time. Then it dissipated, sending chips and chunks of the material raining down. I'm glad to see you escaped unscathed. I rubbed blood off the back of my neck and showed him my fingers. Not exactly how I'd characterize it. What happened? One of the demons headed me off and jumped inside my chest. Underlord Kaim presented a vision, renewing an invitation to his stronghold. He cocked an eyebrow. Are you certain the sun isn't affecting you? I pointed skyward without looking. Do you see the sun, dude? Giles didn't move. Calm yourself. If I'd had a silver for every time I'd heard those words during the intensive boxing of the last 2 weeks, I'd be rich. Giles would jab me in the nose, duck under my counters, give me a hook in the chin, frustrate the hell out of me, then tell me to calm myself. I'm calm. Why are you shivering in the heat of morning? It's nothing. Unconvincing. It was a cut scene. I suspected I was trying to convince myself more than him. Cut scenes didn't usually resonate in one's chest and send shivers of fire and ice down one's spine after they ended. A what? Oops, I wasn't thinking straight. It's not the sun. The vision was real. Kame wants me. I think the whirlpool was meant to speed me along. Did you analyze him? Catch his level? 70. Giles snatched a glance over his shoulder at one of the looming high-level demons. Yet this minion is level 90. Kame's labeled a boss. Of course. That explains it. A boss is much more powerful than a normal being of the same level. He wants you now, at level 20, when you're unable to defend yourself against his treachery. The depths are bound to be a foul place, but before you regaled me with the tale about your encounter with him beneath the dark wood, I suspected he might be a thing of legend. I have never heard of anyone laying eyes upon him. Now you have twice. No one has ever seen him? Never. His followers proclaim his dominance as the right hand of Holcrum, but I know no tales where adventurers have lain eyes upon him. The location of the depths is unknown to my people, and Saran covers the entire northeastern region of Rubal. My foundation was located in a place called the hinterlands of Seran. It was a 2-day hike to the Saran coast, and a 5-day hike to the northern borders separating Saran from the barbarian territories of the northern tribesmen. Giles was right. The region was huge. The entrance could be anywhere. I recalled Caitlin's visit to the master's cabin a couple weeks earlier, when she requested I find a tome that could unleash devastation on the continent. The massive swatch of blackened earth behind me had been caused by a crystal of much less power. One day, I'll most certainly go there. Solara gave me a quest, so we'll have to find the entrance. One for the ages. Objective: journey to Saran's depths. Recover the final tome of Arturus from Underlord Kame, then destroy it. Rewards: 1 full level, if you are below level 70. 25,000 additional XP. 1 weapon of Mastersmith quality, commensurate with your level at the time of completion and determined by loot specialization. 250 light points. I'd actually been offered the quest by Caitlin, but I guessed Enora had to keep up appearances. This freaking game was weird, and despite the shivers, I found comfort in reminding myself it was exactly that. A game. Giles reminded me of his presence. A quest? I blinked. Yeah, that's the future. At least 50 levels, probably more. To form a raid big enough, we'll need to focus on the tasks at hand. We need to make friends. The sooner we dispatch the governor, the better. I want him buried before I even think about Kame. Then I'll look forward to the Underlord discussion later. Nothing about his tone supported the meaning of his words. May I see the quest in the meantime? I shared the quest. As he read, his eyes widened. With an offering of that number of light points, completion of this task would be a thing of legend. Giles's exploits in the governor's lands, in response to the systematic atrocities visited on underage girls, had cost the elf. The light points he'd lost were the least of the price he paid. There was no way to miss the strain in his features when he spoke about how he'd left his home to spare the queen a potential war for harboring him. No one could use the points more. I wondered if his tilt to the dark side of the meter limited the number of quests he received, and if that might have been one of the reasons he stopped adventuring. But he'd given the indication that he'd fled to Brug's home in Broomhill because Jara's proximity created some kind of anti-magic bubble to hide them from scryers in Warrington. I hadn't noticed there was no mention of a level cap. Would you maintain your level? He nodded. Apparently, but I would need to advance significantly. You must understand a level 70 boss is not just an elite. I've never faced such a foe. Right. He shook his head in derision. My life before sometimes seems insignificant. What can I say? I asked in my nerdiest voice. I'm the mythic. We make life better. Giles waved a dismissive hand. The humble mythic at that. I was joking. You know I don't take this whole Shenhua thing as seriously as the rest of you. That's what worries me. Solara sent a man to make way for other mythics to return to Enora, and he doesn't take it seriously. When I ignored the jab, he changed subjects. Are you sure you won't take the horse? We discussed this. You have to go to Trowsby to find your warrior friend, then to Warrington to find Pronto. After that, you have to find and aid Probert's niece. Portal scrolls or not, you have a long trip ahead. It would take you 2 weeks on foot. I can get my piece done in 2 days, 1 if I jog regularly. Giles had 3 of the scrolls. The magic items bound to the Queen's Forest had been burning a hole in his bag for more decades than I'd been alive. Or that was his thinking, since he hadn't perceived the 2,000-year fast-forward Nokuro Takamoto called the Purge. A few of the demons turned and sped across the blight in our direction. Giles followed my gaze. I counted 4 of the fiery ones hovering at the edge of the black ground. Blight minion, level 22, demon. Blight minion, level 24, demon. Blight minion, level 30, demon. Blight minion, level 32, demon. The grass began to blacken beneath them as they expanded the blight in our direction. More accurately, in Giles's direction. Just because Kane wanted me alive didn't mean he wanted a level 51 elf rogue around to help me. Giles didn't seem concerned by the demon's sudden interest. I wish you'd at least have taken one of the other horses so you could evade danger, considering your propensity for attracting it. I ignored the snipe. Destiny and I planned this for weeks. The party needs the horses to hunt. Jonta and Moggy need meat, since they're orcs. Walking to the closest hunting areas burns time, and we stand to make a lot of progress on the Foundation in the next 2 days. Raising the Foundation so we can defend ourselves in case the governor's people return before we take the fight to him means every minute counts. Besides, the more mounts, the more people who level during the hunts while we're gone. You mature before my eyes. I twitched a shoulder. My people come first. The demons clustered in a tight formation, and the blighting of the grass sped up a bit as they cut a narrow path toward my elven companion. He pointed a finger toward the north. Remember, after you've delivered Destini's letter to her people and progressed to Briarton, avoid the Arum Forest to the west of town at all costs. The nocturnal beings there are often lower in level, but they're higher than you. Don't trifle. Get in, do your business, then take a hasty leave. According to Giles, the forest was in a zone comprised of mobs in the lower 20s. Well, that wouldn't normally concern me. I wasn't out for combat XP, and his tales about sudden disappearances and deaths augmented my resolve to stay diligent. Will you send me an invitation as soon as you have our clan registered? This was the point of my visit to Briarton. Giles insisted the weight of a clan with a mythic at its head would prove more significant than if he founded one in Trowsby. Although I'd found a registrar while planning our liberation of Rashan, I'd avoided forming one because we planned to go into hiding for a bit anyway. We weren't advertising for new companions. But now that the Foundation was underway and the governor had shown his resolve, we needed allies. The only thing between him and us was an ever-expanding blight. A clan with a Shenhua and a purpose might attract those who opposed him. Besides, for all the wisdom of Infinity Designs, they'd created the game with no form of long-range communication unless a player was in a clan. Maybe they'd wanted to keep the experience authentic. Perhaps they wanted to encourage grouping and inter-guild communication, despite the ability to bind NPCs to players. I didn't pretend to understand the logic, I just had to work with it, especially since inventing cell towers wasn't an option. Giles grasped my hand and shook it. Practice your sword strokes. You grow confident, and the use of these strange skills Solara has given you is becoming second nature. Hopefully your bow will keep potential threats distant, but you tread into more challenging lands, where your level will be matched or exceeded. If melee combat becomes necessary, treat every combatant with the same regard you treat me in our duels. That's the 9th time you've said those things. I released his hand and clapped his shoulder. Don't worry, this isn't my first rodeo. Rodeo? It's a form of entertainment in my old world where people in funny hats ride wild animals who try their damnedest to buck them off. I want no part of your world. I have no designs on going back. I chuckled, but the airy feeling it lent my chest dissipated when my focus returned to the demons blighting a path toward us. I cocked my chin in their direction, but Giles shifted his gaze to the sun and saluted to shade his eyes. If I want to pass the Plague Barrens by nightfall and recover my proper mount, it's time we part ways. Remember, Briarton can be a rough place, where constant raids by those foul creatures of Aurum Forest have hardened its people. I haven't been there in many years, but last time I passed through, even the children were no strangers to combat. They will be grown now. Imagine that. Watch yourself. Acknowledged. Also, the tribesmen of the High North don't usually venture too far south, but Diciny's marks on our map depicting where her people might be skirt on their territory this time of year. I doubt it will be a problem, but you should be constantly on your guard. What's more, the beasts up there are usually level 25 or higher. I nodded to acknowledge his warning, but focused on the earlier sentiment. I look forward to seeing this exotic mount you keep talking about. You'll like it. He winked, and it seemed entirely out of character. Trust me. If it's as special as you say, it might not mesh with the idea of a low profile. Keep your head down. This time it was Giles who chuckled, and the hint of a smile at the corners of his lips forced one of my own. When we meet up again, we should discuss who is the guide in this relationship. The elf was lightening up. You're the teacher. It's not in question. Then consider how riding one of the governor's branded horses into town instead of my own mount might bring even more unwanted attention. I'd come to understand Giles was usually right. I concede the point. Wise. He gave a curt half-nod. By the time I've completed my missions, I expect you'll be in Briarton. If I don't hear from you by the time I've worked out my business with Mulk's niece and located Pronto, I'll use my teleportation scroll to return to the Queen's Forest. Giles whipped out his daggers, spun to face the encroaching demons, then vanished in a cloud of smoke. A moment later, he reappeared atop the blight. His ghostly form began to zip around Holcrum's demons in a circle, striking at them with vicious attacks. The elf was a blur as he vanished, reappeared a quarter of the way through the cycle, slashed, disappeared, rematerialized, stabbed, rinsed, and repeated. His blades segmented the creatures into pieces despite their fiery facades. In seconds, the demons were vanquished. Then the blighted earth sucked them into the underworld. Show off. I threw him a two-fingered salute. Giles returned it after sheathing his daggers. The horse's massive head tilted to one side as he mounted. He patted its neck, eliciting a nicker from the animal. Until we meet again, Shenhua. May you forever be contented in the light, I said. Close enough. He jerked the horse's reins to steer it away. They sped along the edge of the darkened land, allowing it a wide berth while traveling west. He would turn south somewhere over the next rise. I watched for a minute as the blight minions perked up and sped toward the edges in his direction, although they had no hope of catching him. 3. Van Helsing might have blanched at Giles's warnings about the shade witches in the Aurum Forest, but I found myself anticipating the other stops planned during my trip north. I'd always enjoyed my first encounters with new races and games, so the prospect of meeting more Michonne caused tingles, and the prospect of finishing up in the Elven Forest along the eastern coast at the end of my quest made me want to run the whole way. No quests were offered when Giles and I planned my trip to the Queen's Forest, but I had picked up one when he suggested I register a clan. Suspicions about whether Enora presented quests to drive me in certain directions left me feeling like a conspiracy theorist, and it wasn't a new suspicion. Expanding horizons. Giles has suggested you visit the clan registrar in Briarton to form Enora's first player-led clan. Enoran clans bring beings together so members can communicate over long distances, plan parties and raids, and ally with or declare war on other clans. By earning XP as a member of a clan, you raise its prestige level. With each level comes new benefits such as bonus XP, money awards, and much more. See the new section on clans in your Enoran Player's Guide for details. Reward: 8,000 XP. The quest text went as far as mentioning Giles by name. In other games, that would have made him the quest giver, but I found the use of his name convenient, and it reeked of static quests in lesser games I'd played. You have discovered the hilly thickets. 1,021 XP. My fourth instance of discovery XP that day. After 2 weeks of training with only stamina gains to speak of, the progress of the meter at the bottom center of my interface was inspiring. It flashed blue and increased by a tick with each new discovery. As much as I loathed leaving my people behind, an air of liberty filled the vacuum as the experience points racked up. The area was aptly named. Although the hills rolled, they were low. Thickets filled with various families of trees sprouted to the north, east, and west. Distant thunder echoed from somewhere beyond the northern hills, but I saw no sign of dark clouds. I cocked my ear toward the sky, then gazed into a dark patch of trees on my left as the distant beating I'd mistaken for a coming storm became ground-level thunder. I faded into stealth and stepped just far enough into the trees to ensure their shadowy cover protected me from discovery by any higher-level creatures who might be traipsing around. I padded across pine straw as the level footing became a slow incline. With a quick head check in both directions, I shuffled across a short field of high grass, then climbed to another patch of trees. When I'd settled in the shadows near the northern edge, a dusty trail came into view, and the source of the pounding racket revealed itself. Troops marched a wide road from the northwest that intersected with the path I'd traversed before winding in a boomerang back to the northeast. My mouth might as well have been a flytrap. Spearmen led the ranks with long swordsmen immediately behind. The orange glow of the setting sun lent the illusion their armor was cast in flames. Beyond them, the soldiers' weaponry varied from short swords to maces. Archers crested the hill where the wider road wound out of sight. A few men on horseback rode on either side of the ranks. The battalion marched in neat formation, but many shoulders slumped, and more helmets were held than worn. They marched under a black banner with a red lion flapping in the wind. The only place I had seen that symbol was on a horse's drapery the night we encountered the governor's men on a road south of the Plague Barrens. It had covered the animal ridden by the governor's nephew. Before I shoved a knife in his back and twisted it. We'd cast off that drape without a second thought to ensure no curious eyes suspected the ill deed by which we'd nabbed the animal. It wasn't until we'd arrived in the Foundation that we noticed a small brand on its hindquarter, identifying the stolen horse's owner. Questions flooded my mind. I brought up my map, then zoomed wide. What were the governor's men doing this far from Milbury Peaks? Had there been a rebellion? Had an army come ashore from Lao? Very unlikely. Another banner hung with pride in the shop of a weapon merchant in Tralsby depicted the red and white coat of arms worn on the pins of the king's guards throughout the region. If an army had come ashore, I suspected the king would have sent troops, and the lion was definitely not his sigil. Where the heck are they going? My eyes traced the curve of the road leading east as my map zoomed. There was only one place they could be going. I swallowed a lump. They're marching toward the Elven Forest, my final destination. Although Giles described fishing villages along the coast to the south of our instanced home, he'd also explained the rocky beaches north of the Foundation were uninviting to settlers, and farther north, they rose into high cliffs, acting as insurmountable barriers to anyone who would approach the elves from hundreds of feet below. I'd once wondered if Giles would be welcomed back among the people he'd left so long ago. Although he described the elves as congenial beings who avoided human politics that didn't affect them, and few did, he made it clear they didn't respond well to humans trying to take their own kind prisoner. This was why he fled 5 decades before, to avoid conflict with the previous governor within the Elven Forest. My mentor and friend wasn't known for embellishment, so I took him at his word. Wonderment about whether he'd be welcomed back was staunched when I'd heard Pulo call him Prince Renar the day they met. Giles skirted the subject at every opportunity to fill me in, but if the title meant he was a descendant of elven royalty, perhaps he'd not only be welcome, but might also recruit some of his brethren to our cause. But I tried not to hope. If I got a few Michonne to come home with us, I'd counted a victory. A small one, but a win nonetheless. Yet I still found myself returning to the key question in the weeks after I'd repelled the governor's attack by crushing the entropy crystal that unleashed blight and demons outside my foundation. Was the matriarch of the Queen's Forest Giles' mother? The archers moving down the hill were followed by humans in simpler clothing, riding in carts stacked with bulging bags of supplies. I counted off the carts, then tried to absorb just how much food and other materials they transported. This battalion could conduct a siege. Only one question counted. What do I do now? Voices echoed from near the front of the ranks, but I couldn't make out the words. The convoy stopped in a sequential crunching that resounded from the front line to the back. It was like hearing metal dominoes fall. The soldiers fanned out and unpacked their gear in the grassy areas to the north side of the path. One horseman rode to the front of the pack and stopped. Unlike the others, he wore a black robe. He didn't join the horsemen circling the foot soldiers barking orders. Instead, he faced east like he was frozen in time, his black steed equally still. His head swiveled in my direction, and I slipped behind the tree, although the notion he'd spot me as I stood in stealth in the dark shade of the tree grove was ridiculous. A cold chill swept over me as I squinted in his direction. 2 short horns sprouted from either side of his forehead. Taut maroon skin covered his bald scalp, and a black stripe ran down the bridge of his nose. I traced his robed form and noted a staff with a glass or crystal head secured on his saddle. I couldn't make out the shape from this distance, but it jutted like the head of some creature. Urakan, Terran, level 30 necromancer, elite. Necromancers are casters of shadow affinity who summon skeletal warriors and demon spirits to fight at their sides. Priya might have shared my chills at the sight of that guy, despite her high shadow disposition. The thought of my beloved blonde companion made me wonder whether the elves would possess remedies to dispose of her lycanthropy, but I swept my musings aside to focus on the present. Scouting the forces seemed a fine idea. The mules and horses at the rear stopped on the hill, so the end of the procession wasn't visible beyond its crest, but I'd seen enough to know they were blocking my way and it might be a long walk around. The grove surrounding me was the last one before the hill, so the terrain from here to the other side sat in the open. 3 soldiers in chain removed their chest pieces, then reached into heavy duffels and retrieved axes. One of their fingers pointed my way. The other 2 nodded, then all 3 turned and trudged down the hill. They're coming for firewood. My back pressed to a wide trunk. I scanned the trees in the direction from which I'd come. This grove stretched about 25 yards north to south, and maybe twice that left to right. A thicker stand of trees on the opposite side looked like a good observation point. Health bars popped over the axe carriers' heads with the accompanying color-coded numbers representing their levels. The least of them was level 21, the highest 24. I was level 20. Stealth might hold up from a distance, but I didn't have a frame of reference from my adventures in Enora to be sure. Luckily, it was a classless skill I'd discovered in the dark wood. If I was going to level samurai, I needed to stick with it, and the ability to stealth as any class was awesome. I hadn't spent the last 2 weeks getting throttled by Dicinia until I could hold my own just to revert to a starter class, and with the men moving toward me, I didn't want to be caught in the middle of a global cooldown. Although I knew the effort would be in vain, I tried to contact Giles on party chat. His avatar was grayed out in my companions tab. I'd received a message that I'd left the Foundation chat over an hour before, so there was no relaying a message through Dicinia or Priya. Damn it. What do I do? If Giles was made aware, what options would he have? After decades hiding out in the South, I doubted he had connections to other adventure parties. If he returned to the Foundation, he could grab Roshan, Priya, and Dicini, then head north to meet the army, but they'd be crushed. Besides, there were still demons and a quarter-mile of blighted land outside both the Foundation's entrances, and the women were trapped. Maybe Brugge had a few connections. Giles planned to meet up with him during his journey. He hadn't said how the arrangements had been made, but I suspected they planned things before he followed us to the Plague Barrens. I scanned the distant line of soldiers as the axemen drew closer and shook my head. I lacked time, and we lacked these numbers. Brugge had spent all his time with Giles in the south, and he wasn't likely to have people either. After all, he was from Broomhill, and that butt-blister of a town certainly didn't boast soldiers or adventurers. Turning back was an option. Delay finding Diciny's people, grab a horse from the Foundation, then go after Giles. Though by the time I caught up, the governor's troops might have nearly reached Forest. But what if it isn't their goal? What if you're reading too much into it? Could they be on a training expedition? Axes clopped into wood in the distance as I eyed my map. The only other place the west-east road led was into Saran's Reach, where Underlord Kame dwelled in the depths. While it was possible the soldiers were moving in that direction to rid the eastern part of Rubal of a long-time nuisance, I had to ask myself, why now? Had they discovered the entrance? That would be interesting. The more likely explanation for the battalion smacked me in the face. Giles. He'd come out of hiding. The Worsagers might have scried his essence, but our new party mate, Probert Mulk, had undoubtedly reported on his presence before he unintentionally became my companion. The governor wanted us. I'd blighted our own land to keep him out, so the regent turned his attention to another target in order to get our attention, to draw us out. But how would he know it would get our attention? Does he suspect Giles goes there? Or has gone there? If he suspects that, then might he use suspicions of treason for harboring a fugitive as an excuse to attack the elves? Arrest the queen? The soldiers worked close enough for me to see the whites of their eyes, so I scurried through the trees and out of their sight line. I didn't know why these men were here, but the nagging voice in my head said the conflict Giles had tried to avoid all those years ago had brought the governor and his forces right to the elves' doorstep. There were no two ways about it. I needed to talk to Giles. If Prontu's recruitment had to wait, then it had to wait. If only Enora had established a general channel. I scrolled my map to the town in the north I'd originally targeted as my second destination. Briarton, I muttered. If I could reach it and warn Giles, he could teleport back to prepare the elves for what was coming. I sighed. Diciny's family would have to wait. Although I knew the elves weren't helpless and undoubtedly maintained defenses in their own forest, Giles might give me hell for not adapting my plans if he knew what I was seeing. I owed the elf. A voice echoed off the trees. Where you think you're going? Got a spring one if you don't mind, a second voice said. Why, you want to hold it for me? A guy with leather armor, a sheen of sweat across his brow, and a deep scar running down one side of his face stepped up to a high pine. He wasn't carrying an axe. It'd be prudent to wait until nightfall to sneak around the battalion anyway. Might as well get some XP while I'm here. After all, it is a game. Tellus, human, level 21, ranger. Ranger? My man, you forgot your bow. I reached for the wrapped pommel of my katana as I drew closer, but it clicked audibly as I withdrew it from the sheath. Then the man swung around and his eyes flared. Alarm! Intruder! 4. Diciny. After seeing Gemini and Giles off, Diciny and the others navigated the pass between high rock walls that emptied into the sprawling valley with stony grass-topped steps. She stopped when the morning sun shone on her face. Mogu and Jonta turned north, while Priya wandered up the steps toward the cave. Lucius entered the architect's cabin, and Diciny spied Charney approaching Rashan, who'd apparently returned from the cave and gone back to polishing her tribute to the goddess, which, as Gemini explained, actually resembled Priya's mother, the matron of the wood. She guessed that made sense. If Rashan had no visual representation to go by, she'd use what she knew. The story of how such a wondrous being directed Priya and Gemini to her before she'd even arrived in Broomhill struck a tone of awe that resonated in Diciny's mind. The plights of these two companions caused her heart to thump an extra beat that vibrated in her throat. She relaxed her eyelids, inhaled deeply through her nose, and enjoyed the star's warmth on her cheeks for a few seconds before releasing her breath. Pulo made her flinch. I could nary imagine a better place for the Master's foundation. Can you recall the empty fields of weeks ago? Diciny nodded.
"Shall we go to the master's cabin?" Pulo asked. The eager foreman loved a new morning, and since Gemini's departure had drawn all the laborers from their duties, he was probably eager to continue the tutorials they'd started when Gemini decided she would hold the reins in his absence. "A moment, please." It wasn't her intent to be short, but the incessant worries racing through her mind left little room for chit-chat, and she wanted to acknowledge them so they wouldn't linger when she set to work. Although thankful he hadn't yet wandered from the cave shivering with resurrection sickness, Decini missed Gemini already. His confidence that she'd serve with distinction as the Foundation's administrator in his absence took her aback, but the explanation of his logic revealed a deeper understanding of her than she knew he possessed. Instead of placating her or feeding her ego, he laid his reasoning out plainly, thereby stifling any arguments before they started. His intuitions were undeniable. Then there was the priestess. Roshan's sudden exodus from the procession before Gemini left punctuated the priestess's unpredictable demeanor of late. Priya believed Roshan on some level understood Gemini had crushed the crystal, imprisoning the dark souls outside the instance to save them all from the governor of Null's dark intentions. But the evil dancing on her doorstep was unleashed by the man she thought would be a purveyor of only the light, a man to which she'd bound herself. It was devastating to a woman whose only desire in life was the service of her goddess. At least she'd taken on a student in the priesthood, and nothing took precedence over her assurance Charney became a beacon of all the light offered. The goblin's chaotic attention span made for distractions aplenty. Had Roshan funneled lost hopes for Gemini into the new task? The Cine released a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. Then there was Priya. The half-elf had a lycanthropy problem, and she was pregnant besides. Gemini used a cautious tone when explaining his decision to entrust the Foundation to the Cine, but Priya surprised them both when she responded with relief, citing a complete lack of interest in the job. She had other ideas. Their mythic suspected Priya's love of her role as the resident cook had something to do with what he called a nesting phase. The metaphor likely had something to do with birds, but the Cine hadn't inquired. She suspected the relief in her friend's expression upon learning she wouldn't have to run the shop likely had something to do with the strange words she moaned in her sleep of late. Pulo snagged her attention when his boot touched the first step. "I judge your low eyes and slouched posture illustrate troubling thoughts despite this fine morning. Did the master fail to convince you of your rightful place after all?" The dwarf sometimes had a way with words. The Cine turned her head away. Roshan and Charney rose from the wooden planks they'd half buried to keep their garments clean at the knees when engaging in prayer. The light priestess turned, spotted them approaching the cabin, then blew a quick kiss. The Cine raised a hand in greeting, then forced a smile. At least she wasn't the target of the priestess's ire. Because I'd have broken that damn stone to save her too. Although it came at Gemini's expense, she was pleased with the progression of her own relationship with Roshan of late. She followed Pulo up the stairs. The dwarf shoved open the door of the master's cabin, or MC as Gemini liked to say, but the Cine stopped at the threshold. It wasn't until then she noticed the neatly stacked stones just across the high plateau near the anvil. The dwarf leaned from inside the cabin and followed her gaze. "Ah, we'll come to that, Master Decini." Her head whipped around. "That title is reserved." Pulo's chest jostled as chuckles escaped his oversized dwarven lips. "Do you see Master Gemini around? Last I checked, my interface showed you'd been handed the keys to the kingdom. That makes you the administrator, and being administrator makes you the master when he's gone." "You will not call me this." "Aye, I will." His lip twitched. "Master Gemini insisted upon my doing so. His exact words were, 'Turnabout is fair play,' as I recall." The Cine ground her teeth to stifle a smile. "Bastard." "Aye, but he be a funny bastard." Laughter escaped and liberated the tension throughout her torso. She stepped inside. Rays through the window illuminated dancing dust motes. The dwarf clapped his hands together and rubbed briskly. Bring up your LP as we've done before, and we'll start there with my lady's leave. LP, Labourer's Panel. The dwarf is adopting our master's lazy vernacular. Ticini focused and the panel popped up. She adjusted the translucency with a thought so it projected a metallic background to better enhance her preferred black text. Validus, Michonne, Level 16, Farmer. Jim, Dwarf, Level 11, Miner. Mogu, Orc, Level 17, Logger, Level 17, Woodworker. Jonta, Orc, Level 15, Logger, Level 10, Cook. Braden, Human, Level 14, Smithy, Apprentice. Level 11, Quarryman. Level 7, Miner. Minka, Human, Level 9, Fisher. Level 3, Cook's Apprentice. Telor, Goblin, Level 11, Builder. Sistra, Elf, Level 9, Hunter. Level 2, Cook's Apprentice. Joaquin, Elf, Level 4, Hunter. Bunis, Human, Level 6, Alchemist's Apprentice. I have the list. Focus on Validus, please. While she did, it struck her how Pulo spoke with a politer delivery than other dwarves she'd encountered in shops and on the road. She wondered if his attachment to the goddess softened his disposition. Pulo, are you real? The dwarf flicked up an eyebrow. Real? He snagged the skin atop her wrist, pinched and twisted lightly. Do I feel real enough? Ticini jerked the arm away. Bastard! His lips parted into a wide smile and revealed the dwarven blocks of ivory behind. Seems the world is filled with bastards. Why do ye ask? You're from Solara's realm, yes? Pulo's head swiveled, although his eyes remained focused on her. Nay, best I know, the goddess conjured me out of thin air, filled my brain with the things I needed to know, then dropped me in my first mistress's instance. When my mistress left the world to return to the golden realm of our Sky Queen, I went back to nowhere. Then Master Gemini came, and I was summoned, and I'm quite pleased to be here. You had another master? Aye, 2 millennia ago, but I can't talk about that, so we'd best move on. Do you see Valitus in your interface? I suppose that, as Gemini likes to say, is that. She focused on Validus's name in the list, and the Michonne's image popped into a pane on the left-hand side of her interface, with stats appearing on the right. Although she'd had an interface since her mother was able to communicate with her as a wee bit, this level of detail was unlike anything she'd seen before. Her Mind Tool's expansion started when she first became Gemini's companion, and with each new level gained, she noticed new details. Priya's HP count and mana reserves, Gemini's height and other vital information. But those statistics suffered vastly compared to what she saw now that she'd been named the administrator of the Foundation. Validus, Michonne, Level 16 Farmer, Strength 7, Dexterity 11, Intelligence 4, Wisdom 1, Constitution 8, Charisma 4. She focused on the charisma stat and received a message. This laborer's interactions with occupants of her home instance has increased her charisma attribute. Ticini flicked her eyes up the list to dexterity. The Michonne race is known for agility, and Validus enjoys an increased rate of attribute gain through her daily activities. This is known as a key attribute. That number was high for a laborer of her level. Ticini made a point to find out what activities might be benefiting her. A question popped into her mind. I know you summon laborers for the racial bonuses I saw in the Foundation guide, but do their tasks also feed their key attributes? Aye, you're a sharp one. Master Gemini chose well. Does this mean you're going to answer the question? Pulo chuckled in that way he did, so his barrel chest rumbled. Aye, it does. Their racial traits make laborers better at given tasks, but those jobs don't always align to their key attributes. As a farmer, Validus is more likely to gain strength and dexterity by hoeing rows. The goddess makes us work for our gains. He held up a single fat finger. This is why I assigned Validus to the shelter we built for the anvil. Smoothing rods Mogu cut for lumber and tying them together requires dexterity. Is there a top end to their statistics? We call that a cap, if it pleases ye, Master Decini. And yes, their gains are limited by their levels. They can only gain 1 point in each attribute per level, with the exception of their key attribute, which allows 2 points, but the second point must be earned through their activities. Then at level 16, Validus's maximum strength would be 16, but their dexterity would not cap, as you say it, unless it was 32. Exactly! You got it! Excellent. And I would like to focus them on tasks that cap their key attributes while Gemini is away. The dwarf's bushy monobrow formed a V, and he twisted his lips to one side. No? Decini asked. While attribute increases are key to building a strong foundation in later ranks, I give the racial traits precedence because of the instance gains. Since it's Master Gemini's desire we build the foundation up as soon as possible to prepare for external threats, I think we should continue this track. As administrator, you make the ultimate decision, but I stand ready to advise you. No, of course, Pulo. Arithmetic is arithmetic. If we will grow faster as a foundation by focusing on their racial traits and increased production stemming from them, then we will continue with your method. Focusing on their secondary activities can wait until later. She dipped her head in a slight bow. I'm honored to learn from you, Master Pulo. Aye, but I am not the master of this. One of the dwarf's eyes squinted. He raised the fat index finger and shook it. I see what you're doing there, Lady Decini. Quite the wit. His sudden bellowing laughter reverberated and bounced off the walls. Quite the wit indeed. Decini felt her lips peeling back, and her throat clicked with laughter. Since ye preempted my lesson on labourer statistics, let's turn our tutelage to the foundation itself. Decini nodded acquiescence. The structure you saw outside is to be a forge. Braden quarried and smoothed the stones, then the orcs stuck them. They are touch-ups remaining before the circle is airtight, but with your go-ahead, we'll be ready to activate it tonight. You don't need my go-ahead. Ah, but I do. He dragged the last word. I will meet with you each day just like I did with Master Gemini to ensure I have your sign-off before we begin activities. Decini suddenly understood why Gemini beat her to the plateau to begin their morning runs each day. He was up with the labourers and Pulo before the sun rose. Her chest was warmed by his dedication. Very well. We'll fire the forge tonight. Aye. I also wanted to talk to you about Priya's diet. Very well. It isn't varied enough. She's pregnant and needs minerals. Agreed. That was easy, Decini thought. Pulo set his hands on the table centered on the room. As you know, Level 2 of the Foundation is called a hamlet. When we advance it, soybean farms become available in the tech tree. If I had soybeans, I could cheat and build one now. Alas, I do not. How will we build it by leveling the Foundation? Solara's magic grants us a small stockpile. Once Validus plants, the farm will produce each week. It surprises me how time speeds up inside this place. How is this? It isn't. Things just happen faster. I found it best not to question that which benefits us. Trust the goddess. She nodded. Right. Decini opened the tech tree in her interface. So, the structures with the green edges are built, and the numbers in the bottom corner represent how many we have. The ones with blue framing are available, but haven't been built. Correct. Then we need a sawmill and a barracks. But these arrows merging from those structures to the soybean farms confuse me. How does a sawmill and a barracks prepare us for advanced farming? They have nary a thing to do with farming, but they're required structures to reach a level 2 foundation, and we must have a hamlet to obtain the soybeans for a farm. I suddenly feel stupid. I sense you're anything but. You're too kind. Would you like me to stop being kind? If you like it rough, I can. You tease me. Pulo's chest rumbled again. I do. Anyway, once we have soybeans, we can rotate crops with the corn farms, which are hard on the soil. Yes, Dicini interrupted. The soybeans replenish the soil. My people were farmers before they became migrants. Will we rotate in one soybean crop for every 2 harvests? Pulo squinted as he peered out the side window and tapped his chin. No, I think we can harvest 3 corn crops before we switch to soybeans. 1 farm at a time will more than suffice for Priya's nutritional needs. Since we're on that topic, we should address a problem. Dicini frowned. The moons are full tomorrow. Aye, Priya will need to stay indoors, lest we have a werewolf running around, causing havoc. I've seen no evidence the werewolf causes havoc to anyone but her enemies. It occurred to Dicini they spoke of Priya's shapeshifter form as if it was a different being. Aye, but werewolves of lore are unpredictable. It might be wise to keep her inside during the night hours. The moons are full every 15 days. Will we imprison her every time? Begging your pardon, Master Dicini, this is hardly imprisonment, especially if ye broach the subject with her prior. Dicini set a hand to her chest, as if to press the hollow that formed there when she thought of Priya's predicament. Although the half-elf hadn't broached the subject, Dicini sensed she worried about how her violent shifts might affect her unborn child. Her thoughts followed a natural progression and shed new light. Shape-shifting is painful anyway. I will broach the subject. Fine, thank ye. I've listed the labourers' tasks for today if you'd like to review them. Dicini waved a dismissive hand. I plan to make the rounds as they work. Let's talk about the sawmill and the barracks. I'd like to advance to Hamlet as soon as possible. I too prefer an aggressive plan. Open your guide to the barracks, and ye will see the requirements. Barracks. The barracks serves as a residence and provides training grounds for instance defenders. Capacity increases with each rank. Rank 1, 20 defenders. Rank 2, 30 defenders. Rank 3, 50 defenders. Rank 1 building requirements. 100 building points. Architect level 13 for blueprints. 200 mined gold. 300 wood planks. 25 animal skins. Deer or elk. Build time, 2 days. Build times are decreased by 10% per laborer. Max laborers, 4. The stockpiles paid shows our reserves. Dicini brought it up with a thought while Pulo continued to talk. She focused on the resources collected for the barracks build. Stockpiles. Gold ore, 327. Copper ore, 93. Tin ore, 36. Wood planks, 631. Animal skins, 6. You'll see we have the resources to begin construction, except for the animal skins. I was going to recommend a hunting party. It shouldn't take long to harvest the 19 animal skins we require. Auto skinning will be faster, and we can use the time saved to salt the meat. Aye, what I'd give to have a bag like Master Gemini's so we could stuff meat in it. But we make do. When the foundation reaches a level 3 boro, we can construct a void box in the storehouse and will no longer need to preserve food. 1 box will hold it all. If only we were so lucky. I was simplifying. Each box holds 20 slots, each slot allowing for stacks of up to 20 of a given item, but that is a way off yet. Understood. So if we can build the barracks, how long will it take us to collect the materials for the sawmill? And more importantly, don't you need some kind of big saw for a mill? Aye, I'll answer the second question first, if it suits ye. Lucius is in the architect's cabin, working on the designs for a crank saw. As the name implies, it's a saw turned with a crank. Mogu will work the sawmill once erected. If Mogu is in the sawmill, who will chop down the trees? All due respect, Lady Michonne, anyone can swing an axe and move out of the way. But you've forgotten Jonta is a logger. Gah, I always see her with Priya cooking. That's okay, you'll remember now. Anyway, Mogu's advancement has been surprising in a number of ways. He is becoming too advanced to waste his talents. Jonta's cooking skill will suffer, but Sistra will level faster when Priya gives her a heavier load. I'm glad to hear all this. We should try to ensure all our laborers advance in this way to get the most out of them. Agreed. but I want them treated kindly as long as I'm in charge. How else might I treat them? I've heard you bark orders when Mogu naps in the forest. Well, there's a time for napping and a time for working. Fair enough, but everyone needs a break, and his work isn't simple. Now, what about my first question? What? His eyes took on a distant gaze. The timetable. We'll expunge the majority of our 121 building points on the barracks, but with our labourers out there working hard, we earn more BP each day. Our current rate is 200 bonus BP for a total of 300. The Cine summoned the BP chart. Building points. Each foundation receives a daily allotment of 100 building points, BP, distributed at 12 a.m. Enoran time. The allotment of BP can be increased in 3 ways. 1. Foundation level increase. Level 2. Hamlet, 200 BP. Level 3. Borough, 350 BP. Level 4. District, 500 BP. Level 5. Town, 750 BP. Level 6. City, 1000 BP. 2. Laborer count. 20 BP are awarded daily per summoned laborer. If a laborer falls in battle, the BP are removed from the daily award. 3. Companions. 5 BP per bound companion present in the instance at the time of the daily reward. Requires 2 farms before benefit is realized. We have seen massive gains in our daily allotment. Yes, but we will need every point as we advance. Since the sawmill requires 300 BP, we will have enough to begin construction tomorrow. The build time is 2 days. Decini swiped between panels and tapped her lips. You have 4 suitable laborers to work on that project, which will cut the build time by 40%. We could advance the foundation quickly if we set a couple other tasks aside. If that's your wish, it shall be done. With your approval, we'll get the forge up in the morning, then lay the foundations for the other 2. Our final piece will be the spirit towers. I think you'll be pleased when you see the special changes to the foundation when it transitions. What kind of special changes? Some events are best not described in words. Be patient, and your eyes will be pleased. Exciting. Decini clapped her hands and rubbed them together, much as the dwarf had when they first entered the cabin and set to work. Aye, and if I might make 2 final suggestions. Please. Ye might go visit Lucius and check up on her blueprint progress for the saw. It'd be good for her to see ye, since she spends so much time in there alone. I'll do that. And the other suggestion? I recommend calling everyone in the camp to watch the firing of the forge. I sense you're one for ceremony, and this is one to witness. The Cine couldn't hide her smile.